Tonight on The ReidOut.
Why not release the tax returns that aren't involved in the audit?
I have very big tax returns. I'm sure you've seen the picture where the returns are literally from the floor to up to here. Tremendous cash flow. You don't learn much from tax returns.
The House Ways and Means Committee votes on what to do with Trump's tax returns. Their decision could come down at any moment. Plus, a caucus in chaos. Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is still struggling to land the Speaker's gig as new questions surface about the possibly made-up background of an incoming member of his caucus. And later, the Griot's White House correspondent April Ryan on her new book, Black Women Will Save the World, profiling leaders and activists on the front lines of social and political change. We begin tonight with one of the biggest political scandals in the history of the nation.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Okay, no, not really. But it actually was the biggest scandal ever for a lot of Republicans who sunk their teeth into a chance to take down a Democratic president. It was arguably the dawn of the toxic, hyper-partisan Republican trolling strategy with the help of right-wing talk radio and an outspoken clan of Clinton enemies, not to mention a very, very thirsty mainstream media. Remember, President Clinton came close to getting indicted over this stuff. But on his final full day in office, he reached an arrangement with a special prosecutor to avoid being prosecuted for his misleading statements about Monica Lewinsky. Part of that agreement meant a 5-year suspension of his bar license. So president lying about a sexual relationship? Okay, I guess. But you know what feels like the bigger scandal? Oh, right. Pressuring elected officials and trying to intimidate the vice president into overturning an election. Hyping up a deadly mob to storm the U.S. Capitol and force lawmakers to hide and run for their lives, including the vice president, who they were threatening to hang. Oh, and striking at the central tenet of American democracy, namely the peaceful transfer of power to a president that the people elected. I mean, seriously, what's the bigger scandal? Lying about an affair or attempting to overthrow the U.S. government by force? An outrage that came with casualties. I mean, it's not a sexual affair, but okay, come on. And yet, here we are, waiting with bated breath to see if the DOJ is going to do something about Trump, as those who howled over Clinton remain silent about Trump's transgressions. Still, this is less than a jolly holiday season for Trump, and not because the so-called woke mob is canceling Christmas. They're not. And not because he thinks Santa Claus cannot be black. He can. But because Trump's luck may finally be running out. Yesterday, the House January 6th committee unanimously voted to recommend that Trump be criminally prosecuted, finding that he likely violated at least 4 or maybe even 6 federal statutes, including aiding and abetting an insurrection. NBC News has also confirmed breaking news from Punchbowl, saying the committee is cooperating with the Justice Department's special counsel, who's charged with overseeing investigations into Donald Trump. It's not the only legal headache for the former president. Far from it. The DOJ is already criminally investigating Trump for his actions after the election, along with his retention of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate after his presidency ended. In Georgia, a criminal inquiry is focused on Trump's push to have the election results altered there. In New York, the attorney general is suing him for fraud. And earlier this month, a jury in New York found the Trump Organization guilty of all charges in a sweeping 15-year tax fraud scheme that prosecutors said was orchestrated by top executives at his company. And Trump is about to take a hit on that one thing, the thing that he is most sensitive about and shifty about, too, his tax returns. He's engaged in a years-long battle with Democrats to keep those returns secret.
I will absolutely give my return, but I'm being audited now for 2 or 3 years, so I can't do it until the audit is finished, obviously. It's under audit. I'll release them when the audit's completed.
My tax returns are very simple. They're under a minor audit, routine audit, as they have been for many years. Every year I get audited. At the appropriate time, I will release them. But right now I'm under routine audit. Nobody cares.
You know, the only one that cares about my tax returns are the reporters.
You don't think the American public is concerned?
No, I don't think so. I won. I mean, I became president. No, I don't think they care at all.
But his taxes. Right now, the House Ways and Means Committee is meeting on whether to publicly release them, the one thing he has never, ever, ever wanted. Joining me now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and a former senior member of the Mueller probe, and Tara Setmeyer, senior advisor for the Lincoln Project. Thank you both for being here. Andrew, I do want to start with you. And I mean, the tax thing feels, in a sense, like the least of Trump's worries, but we're going to focus on it anyway because there has been this long-standing desire for the public and the Democrats to see them like every other president has shown them. Here's what Trump has said about flouting tax laws in the past.
As a businessman and real estate developer, I have legally used the tax laws to my benefit. I have brilliantly used those laws. I have a fiduciary responsibility to pay no more tax than is legally required, like anybody else. Or, put another way, to pay as little tax as legally possible.
I mean, the thing is, the fact that he admitted it means that he understood that a wealthy man, even if he is not really a billionaire because he never was, can flout tax laws and get away with it. He just admitted it openly. What do you think? Is there some legal jeopardy at some point for the fact that this man clearly has not paid taxes in a really long time?
I actually see this like you do, Joy, which is, I think this is interesting. I think there will be a political hit for the release of these returns, but I think it's not impossible, but unlikely to be a legal hit. And the reason I say that is it's very hard to bring tax prosecutions. The mens rea, the intent standard, is that you have to show that the defendant knew what they were doing was illegal. That's usually not the law. There will be lawyers and accountants, as corrupt as they might be, who will have blessed the tax returns. And so Donald Trump will be able to say, I relied on that. That's just sort of, I hate to say it, that's sort of the game that's played. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's important to remember that we're really operating in two fronts. There's the legal front and there's sort of the public education front, where it's really educating the public about what this man is about. And what the beauty of the January 6th committee is, they operated on both fronts, where they really changed, at least for me, how I thought about January 6th and saw it as this overarching scheme. And yet they also developed tons of evidence. And that's the thing we're going to all be focusing on tomorrow, is all of the new pieces of evidence on Donald Trump and also underlings who might be able to be flipped. So I do think that the tax returns are going to be important, but probably more in terms of the sort of outrage of, people like you and me who are sitting there going, I pay a lot more taxes and I certainly don't make that much money. So, I think it will have that kind of effect.
Right. I mean, the last time he paid taxes is when he worked for the same company that I do right now. When he was on The Apprentice, they paid him a W-2 like I get. So that's when he paid taxes. Tara, and this is why I think Trump, the problem is scale, right? He seems to have just been a crime scene walking for decades. And so the tax thing winds up being more, of a humiliation, to Andrew's point, because he's tried to portray himself as a billionaire. He clearly wasn't. I think we now know that was never true. But I think what's kind of interesting in it, and where it does sort of dovetail with what the January 6th committee and what the special counsel is looking at, is the tax returns could explain to you who he owes. It could explain to you who might have influence over him. I feel like the media and reporters are going to have a lot more interest in what comes out of these tax returns, because they can then go through them if and when they're released. And I assume they're going to be, because every other president has had them made public. That will be something that will, people like yourself will be able to make hay with, because it'll tell you kind of who his influences and his negative influences and who his debts are to.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this with the Pulitzer Prize winning reporting by the New York Times a few years ago, when they were able to delve into his taxes from previous years. And it's clear that Donald Trump has been a professional scofflaw his entire life, and he wears it with a badge of valor. And this time, I don't think he's worried about as much, where he took tax breaks or what he did. I mean, remember, he's shameless. He took a tax break after 9/11 for one of his buildings, and it didn't really apply to him. And it was like a small tax break, but it was like, really? I mean, he's just shameless. But he's more concerned about, to your point, Joy, his net worth and how much money he actually has. Because the worst thing for him is for people to know that he's not as rich as he actually is, and that he's actually, not the $10 billion man, successful businessman that he claims that he is, and that he rode that wave of that BS portrayal of himself into the presidency. And so that's what he's the most fearful of. I mean, if you listen to what Mary Trump says, if you ever read her book, his biggest fear is being a broke loser. And so, I think that's what he's more fearful of. To Andrew's point, I really don't think that there's going to be any legal repercussions, unfortunately. We saw what happened with the Trump Organization trial in New York City. It was a slap on the wrist, really. Weisselberg was willing to go to jail for a couple of months, and he's one of those tax accountant attorneys that signed off on things that could easily take the fall. But what this really will do will just show again who Donald Trump is, that he really is not the successful businessman that he is. And that embarrassment, I think, will hurt him more than anything, because it will show that he's actually weak and a loser. Yeah. And that is his biggest fear.